The book had smelled of dust and old leather when Eddard Stark opened it, a dry whisper of pages beneath his scarred hand. In the quiet of the Tower of the Hand, the city's noise lay like a distant sea, the shouts of hawkers blunted by stone and velvet. He turned leaves of ink and ancestry, of names long returned to earth, and heard the old words echoing in his mind, the simple refrain that had begun as a curiosity and had hardened into something colder, sharper. Seed is strong. He read again. Baratheon marriages to Penrose and Estermont, to Swan and Dondarrion, to Selmy. A drumbeat through decades. Black of hair, black of hair, black of hair. Wherever the Baratheon blood lay, it threw shadow dark on the crown of suns. He thought of Gendry's strong arms at Tobo Mott's forge, the boy's eyes the blue of deep ice. He thought of Joffrey's bright head gleaming in the sun, and of little Tommen, who clung to his mother's skirts, and of Myrcella's golden braids. He saw Robert as a younger man, laughing, a hammer in his hand, the air around him alive with the smell of horses and hot iron and sweat. He saw the grave they were digging now for Jon Arryn, and he saw his sister's smile bleached to bone. He closed the book. The room was warm. Ned pushed back his chair and went to the window. Smoke hung over King's Landing, its pall cut by shafts of low afternoon light. Distantly, the bells of the great September of Baelor told some feast or fast. He breathed, and the taste of the city, salt and spilled wine and perfumed streets gone sour, filled his mouth. It had to be Stannis. He sat again. Vayenpool's neat little inkstand sat on the corner of his desk. He drew a sheet of parchment toward him, dipped the quill and began to write. Lord Stannis. The words were iron in his hand. He forged them without ornament, the way a man builds a bridge to hold a weight. He told of the book, its lineages unbending through time. He told of Robert's seed, stamped like a sigil upon sons across the 7 kingdoms. He told what his eyes told him and what Jon Arryn's last words had begged him to see. He had no love for Stannis. He had less love for lies. The king's children are not the king's. He wrote until the candle fat ran in golden beads, and his fingers grew stiff. He folded the letter and sealed it with dark wax, pressing the direwolf into it until the wolf stared back at him, jaws open, a soundless snarl in hardened wax. He wrote a second letter to his wife, telling her little and saying everything in its unsaid parts, and then a third, blunt as the first, to Ser Barristan Selmy. He thought of Renly's laughing eyes and thought of Peter Baelish's smile that never reached his eyes and thought of the queen. He rose. Outside, the evening had come like spilled ink. He summoned Tomard and Desmond from the common room below. Fat Tom arrived with a pastry he tried to hide behind his back. Desmond had a new nick in his mail and smelled of oil. They listened with the northern patience he trusted more than any southern vow. I need this letter to Dragonstone, Ned said, holding up the sealed parchment. It must go swift and sure, not by the Red Keep's rookery. Pycelle's pale eyes swam in his memory, the old man hovering like a slow fly. There are rookeries at Rosby and at Stokeworth. You will ride by night to Rosby, Desmond, and place it in the maester's hands. Then you will ride on to Stokeworth with the same. Tom, you'll take the river road to Duskendale. If one raven is delayed, the others will fly. Rosby's a short ride, Lord, Desmond said. Stokeworth is no great distance either. But Duskendale. Take 2 men, Ned said. Be careful. Show the letter to no one. A silver piece for speed, but no more. You will draw foxes if you jingle like a lord. Tomard shifted his pastry from one hand to the other. If the queen hears of it, she cannot stop every raven in the sky. Ned gave them the weight of his stare until both men stood a bit straighter. Ride now. When they were gone, he crossed the yard to the small, shadowed godswood that clung like an old memory against the towering walls. The south knew nothing of godswoods, and yet this one had grown. A thicket of elms and willows and a slender heart tree whose face was worn to a blur by the southern sun. He knelt beneath it a while. Leaves whispered above him. The air smelled faintly of damp and of some herb the maesters tended beneath the branches. He said no prayer. He held the knowledge he had like a sword across his knees and waited until the weight of it settled into his bones. By the time he retraced his steps, a slim, white-haired boy was waiting in the corridor outside his rooms. "Ser Barristan," the boy lisped, "asks if the hand will walk with him." Ser Barristan stood in the torchlight like a statue that had stepped down from its plinth. He inclined his head when Ned approached, and for a moment Ned saw the young man beneath the white hair, all light and speed, the ghost of the king who had once bested the Kingswood Brotherhood with a handful of men because duty demanded it. "Lord Stark," Selmy said, "you sent to me." Ned drew him into his chamber and closed the door. "I did." He gestured to the table and the book that lay upon it. "I need your eyes, Ser Barristan. I need your honor." Selmy's gaze fell to the book, to the open pages, to the line of Baratheon's sons in their black crowns of hair. He read without motion, absorbing as men like him did, deeply, letting things sink to a pressure beyond words. When he finished, he stood a long while, the lamplight showing every crease in his face like cut stone. "Jon Arryn was a true man," he said at last. "He went to his death for this." Ned's voice surprised him. It had gone quiet as snowfall. "He tried to put it before the king. He told Lisa and she fled, and he told me with his last breath and left the rest to memory and chance. Cannot leave it to chance. I have sent to Lord Stannis. He is the rightful heir if this is true." Ser Barristan did not look away. "It may be treason to say it. It would be treason to leave a false king on the throne and name it peace." Ned gestured to the door. "I need you ready when the moment comes. Not for me, for the realm and for Robert, for the man he was and meant to be." Selmy bowed his head. "I am sworn to the king." "To the king," Ned said, hearing the skull beneath the word. "Not to the man who wears a crown wrongfully." The old knight's breath left him slowly. In that exhale, Ned thought he heard the breaking of a small thing, a habit, an ease. Then Ser Barristan nodded once and took his leave without further speech. After, Renly came as he had promised to come, the young lord moving like the memory of spring through a land already braced for winter. He carried with him the smells of jasmine and sweat and the glow of torchlight reflected on polished marble. "Take Joffrey now," he said without preamble. "Tonight, make a clean cut and name your king in the morning." Ned saw the boy he had loved in Robert's face when he said it, saw a young lord who thought a blade could solve what law had tangled and who could not yet believe that the snows of the north fell equally upon the brave and the foolish. "I will not spill a child's blood in the dark," Ned said. "I will do this openly, by law. Stannis is the king. I have sent to him." Renly's lip curled. "Stannis." He said the name as one might say stone. "He has the patience of a block of granite and the same charm." He reached almost impulsively and then checked his hand. "Peter will give you the gold cloaks, with 50 swords. Peter is not a man I will trust with my daughter's breath," Ned said. "Nor yours." Renly stood very straight for a moment. Then the animation went out of him. He watched Ned as a hawk watches a field where it knows a hare must be, but it sees none. "Then you will fall," he said with a sort of wonder. He stepped backward into his shadow, and when he was gone he left the smell of brushed velvet and something else Ned could not name. Later, when the candles had burned low and Arya's light step had passed by outside and Sansa's voice, soft with dreams, had climbed the stair behind Septa Mordane, a knock sounded that Ned had not expected. Varys slipped through, all soft cloth and soft voice and eyes like polished stones. "The city is a nest of stories tonight," the eunuch murmured. "Your men ride. The queen watches. The master of coin smiles." His smile was slight and dissembled nothing. "I might remind the hand that the rookeries of the Red Keep are very busy places. Ravens can fall as easily as a woman steps aside in a crowd." "I did not use the Red Keep," Ned said. "Ah." Varys's lids drooped with appreciation. "Then there are men moving by night." He could not have known about Tomard or Desmond or the letter bound under Fat Tom's mail, still warm against his skin as he rode. Or perhaps he did. "Shall I warn you, my lord?" he asked politely, with no warning in his voice at all. The queen sends armorers to the city watch in the dark. They may be fitting sleeves and notches to the arms of honor, but they may also be measuring you. Thank you for your fluttering, Ned said. Varys's mouth turned in what, on another man, might have been the opening of compassion. I do not flutter, my dear lord. I calculate the air. He folded his hands into his sleeves. The king hunts on the morrow. He hunts hard when he is unhappy. I think he is unhappy. He paused. And he drinks. Lancel pours, Ned said, and there was the faintest stiffening in Varys's face before the mask fell back into place. When the morning came, the king rode out east of the city with horns and laughter and dogs, and a shining boy poured him wine. Desmond reached Rosby in the deep hours before dawn. The moon a stone the gods had set above his head. The gate guards there knew him. Fat bellies and ale breaths and the strange fellowship that comes of men spending too many nights looking at one another's faces. They did not question the seal when he showed them the dire wolf, and did not question the urgency when he named the hand. A sleepy maester with a ring too heavy for his neck took the letter, and Desmond was back in his saddle with the cold in his beard by the time the raven flew. The second raven left Stokeworth by noon, the third by dusk from Duskendale. Ravens fly faster than gossip, faster than men swallowing fear, faster than a boar charges. On Dragonstone, a castle built by fire on rock that remembered fire was like something remembered by a dragon's dream. Sea wind bit at stone courtyards. In the Lord's Solar, where a long table cut in the shape of Westeros held all the realms at a scale one could command with a hand, Stannis Baratheon stood at its northern edge and read a letter with his jaw set. The room smelled of salt and old rushes and tallow. In the hearth, driftwood burned with a brief bright flame. Davos Seaworth waited, cap in hand, a gray man whose hands remembered all the ropes they had ever held. Stannis read the letter again, as if to force from it any slyness of ink that might have slipped past a first gaze. His eyes were the color of slate and as merciless. Maester Cresson, he said. Cresson came from the shadow like the scent of old paper, his chain quiet against his robe. There was a kindness in him that time had not scoured. He took the parchment in both hands, read, set it down, and pushed his spectacles up with a rapt forefinger. Jon Arryn sought these truths, he said softly. He died for it. Stannis's nostrils flared. He died of a belly of tears, they said, and we were meant to pity the widow and not wonder at the cup. They took me for blind. Davos shifted his weight, and the bones in his feet, broken and badly mended by years of decks and rocks and thieves' justice, complained. He watched his lord with the terrible love he had for him, the love that grows when a man sees a harsher man carry a burden anyway. My lord, he said, when the silence had stretched long enough to break. If it be true, the true king must move. Stannis' stare cut to him. And how, Onion Knight, with 6 ships and a handful of men? Robert took a realm with a warhammer and a storm of friends. He left me the law. Then the law must be your hammer, Davos said. He knew the ways of ships and men who feared hunger more than swords, and he knew the way the sea spoke in the night. But law he knew only as the thing that seized him and cut his fingers off and told him it had been just. He thought the law an unkind sea, but Stannis was born to sail it. Cresson's old hand trembled as he laid it flat upon the long table. The realm will not love you for this, he said. They will not sing of it. I do not need their song. Stannis folded the letter. He pressed it with his thumb, not because the wax needed sealing. It had been sealed by the wolf and broken by him, but because it wanted pressing. I will write to the lords. I will write to the city watch. I will write to Selmy. I will write to the Septon and to the Lord's Temporal and to any man who stands between a bastard and my brother's chair. And you, Seaworth, how fast can you run Dragonstone to King's Landing by night? The Black Betha runs quicker than gossip, Davos said, and let a corner of his mouth lift. If the tide likes us, make the tide like us, Stannis said. You will carry a hand and an eye to Eddard Stark, and return with his. If the king dies, I will have his writ with the seal upon it. or I will know why not." Davos bowed, the bend not graceful in a body stiffened by salt and wind. He thought of his boys. Mathos with his ink-stained fingers, Devon daydreaming by hearths, Dale with his easy grin, and felt the old ache in his chest that was pride and grief turned in on themselves. "I will bring you what there is to bring, my lord." When he had gone, Stannis stood with both hands upon the stone table and looked down at the painted river lines and mountain ridges as if they were muscles beneath the skin. Cresson said very low, "There is another counsel you might take, my lord." Stannis did not move his eyes. "I will not call for the Red Woman. I said nothing of. You did not need to." He turned at last. The lines around his mouth deepened. "Send the ravens. Tell Celis to stop her ears to flames." The Black Betha slid at night like a knife. The bay was not calm, but the wind favored her enough that her oarsmen could pull with the tide instead of against it, and Davos liked a sea that worked with him, even grudgingly. Lantern light winked on the waters and died. They passed Massey's Hook by dark. They made the mouth of the Blackwater as a sliver of sickle moon tugged the tide upriver. Davos knew those waters. He had run onions through them when kings and lions snarled ashore and men caught their breaths like nets. He brought the Betha low, under the shadow of the bluffs, and signaled with the little lamp he had brought from Dragonstone. A pinprick wink that would be either answered or noticed by a man who sought such things. A small skiff slid out of the dark. A woman's voice whispered in the tide sounds. "You're late." "I'm early," Davos whispered back. The oarsman had the easy stroke of a man who had rowed before he could sit a saddle. In King's Landing, Davos had learned, there were more oars than horses. "Take me to the mud gate." "To the mud gate, is it?" the woman said skeptically. She smelled of fish and old wool. "You'll be wanting the attention of half the watch." "I'm meeting a man who has the watch's attention already," Davos said. He sat very still with the letter inside his jerkin, stitched there like a small secret heart. When the skiff bumped the stone and he climbed, he left a coin in the boat that felt too heavy for a heron's egg but too light for what he asked. A boy led him, swift as a mouse, through the tunnels of stone beneath the walls. They smelled of damp and mold and the old breath of the city's bowels. When he emerged, it was into an alley that gave onto the back of the Tower of the Hand. Torches flared, then steadied, then were lowered by men who had seen him and not killed him yet. Eddard Stark met him while all the city slept and did not know that something had shifted within its ribs. The Northmen looked as Davos remembered men looking when a storm rolled onto their deck. Not surprised because they had expected storms, but measuring, because every storm was new. "You are Davos Seaworth," Ned said quietly. "The Onion Knight." Davos had never loved that name, but he took it on his tongue without flinching. "And you are the man who sent for the truth," he said. He drew the letter from his jerkin and offered it to the hand with both hands. "Lord Stannis bids me take yours back in turn. And if the king should, if matters worsen, he begs a writ. There will be those who seek to hold paper more tightly than they hold oaths." Ned's mouth moved, and Davos thought he might be about to smile, but there was no humor in him, only a kind of grim fellowship. "There will be paper," he said, "and I pray there will be men." He led Davos into a small side chamber where 3 candles burned and a map of the city lay heavy with stones tamping its edges. Ned's hands moved as if he already held a quill. "We may have little time," he said. "There are more eyes than windows in this city." And there was no time. When dawn broke, it broke on horns and dogs and Lancel Lannister's eager hands pouring wine into a king's mouth. When dusk came after that long day, dusky and loud, it came with a rider at speed through the king's gate and men shouting the king's name and then not shouting it at all. When Ned reached the king's chamber, the air was thick with the smell of blood and bad wine and wet dogs. Ser Barristan was there already, his white cloak grimed at the hem. Robert lay huge and ruined upon a mountain of pillows, his skin gone the color of candle tallow. His hands twitched on the covers as if trying still to grip a boar spear. At his side, the queen watched with a face like a lovely, locked door. Renly was absent. Varys stood near a window. Pycelle hovered with a cup. "What happened?" Ned asked, though he did not need the answer. The boar, Robert said, and the word had a bellow in it still, as if he could speak a memory into happening now and trample it. Big as a horse and twice as ugly. He coughed. His mouth came red. You were right, Ned. I should have left the damn thing for the dogs. His eyes, when they turned, found Cersei, and the look there might have been accusation if the life had not already begun to float out of him like breath on a cold day. Instead, it found Ned again. Right, he said. Right, and I'll sign your damn paper. Ned glanced to Ser Barristan, who stood, as always, as if braced against some sudden wind. Selmy gave the slightest nod, and that was all the oath a man like him needed to give. Ned took the quill. His hand did not shake. He wrote exactly what the king told him to write, but he wrote one word differently, one single word that a lawyer of the Citadel would say changed everything, and a knight would say changed the truth into law. My rightful heir. Cersei watched him as a cat watches the movement of a hand. When the king scrawled his name, she saw that too. When Robert's head fell back, the breath rattling in his chest, she looked suddenly bored. We will speak on what is proper after his grace has rested, she said, and the way she said proper made the word a slender blade. Now, Robert croaked. You will do this now, Ned. He was a shadow of the man he had been, bleeding out into linen he had not warmed, but the old bellow roused. Promise me, Ned. I promise, Ned said. When Davos left the tower with the king's seal upon a writ, the parchment folded twice and stitched into his jerkin above his heart. He felt the city listening. It was too big to know one man at a time, but a city learns the smell of certain times: riot, plague, coronation, harvest, sack. This smelled, to Davos, like the moment an old ship's rigging groans and you must decide to cut lines or hang on. He cut no lines. He went to the same skiff by the same black water and, before the moon had begun to climb, was away to sea. When the king died, the bells tolled not as for prayers, but as for the weight of stones sliding into the river. And with the bells came men, the queen's men with their Lannister red and gold cloaks, the city watch in their blunted yellow, the small folk with their eyes like stones thrown by children in a pond, watching for ripples. The small council gathered as if drawn by a string. Peter Baelish in dove gray, Varys gliding, Renly in green and gold and laughter that did not reach his eyes, Pycelle with a vial of some memory of youth held between finger and thumb. Ned went slowly to the throne room. Ser Barristan walked beside him. Janos Slynt waited there with half the city watch at his back and half not present. Littlefinger watched Janos Slynt like a man who had just purchased a good knife and was curious about its balance. On the Iron Throne sat a boy with bright hair and a chin that wanted to be a man sooner than it had earned the right. Cersei stood to one side, hand upon the arm of the throne as if she could guide the iron with the crook of her fingers. Sansa was behind her, white-faced, Septa Mordane's hand on her elbow. Arya was not there. Ned felt that absence like a blade and swallowed it. Janos Slynt's voice rang against old iron and stone. Lord Eddard Stark presents himself. Ned stepped forward the space required. He held the king's writ in his hand, not yet lifted, and there was a hush in him that no noise could find. Your Grace, he said to the boy, my lords, I come to read the words of the late King Robert Baratheon, written and signed and sealed in his last hour. Cersei's smile had the small pity one might afford a child's drawing. The king named his son his heir, she said. The king named his rightful heir, Ned said, and let each letter fall to the floor between them like a pebble into a well. He broke the seal because he must show it or destroy it. He read, his voice neither loud nor humble, but simply set at the pitch that carried truth. The last word he set down was Stannis. He did not look at Renly then. In his mind's eye, he saw a gray ship racing before a dark wind, a parchment stitched into wool over a simple heart. Cersei moved like a poured thing. She stepped and plucked the parchment from his hand with fingers that had never known a rope burn. She looked at it with the calm of a predator inspecting a snare. In one clean motion, she tore it in two. Gasps rose like birds startled from a tree. For an instant longer than a heartbeat, there was no sound at all. Janos Slint's eyes went to Littlefinger's face. Littlefinger's eyes went to the Queen's hand. Peter's mouth moved once, and if he spoke it was so soft that only his own conscience would have heard him. Ned lifted his head. "Ser Barristan," he said, "you are the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard." Selmy had not moved when Cersei tore the letter. He did not move now. He did speak, his voice thinner than once it had been, but no less certain. "A Kingsguard serves the king, not the king's mother." Cersei's face barely shifted. "Then serve him," she said, and placed a hand upon Joffrey's shoulder. And the boy shrank beneath it and then sat taller. Janos Slint coughed. The sound was small in his big chest. "My lord hand," he said and licked his lips. "The city watch keep the king's peace." "Keep the law," Ned said. "Keep your oath." He felt the room tilt, ever so slightly, as if something under them had moved in the dark. Then a trumpet sounded, faint beneath the roof and the long red hangings, and a ripple passed through the watchman near the far doors. A man came with a sealed letter bearing the crowned stag, pushed through men who did not know if they should push him back. He had sea salt in his hair and eyes so dry with fear or salt that they shone. Varys drifted forward before any other could. He accepted the letter with a flourish that was half mockery and half courtesy, and broke the seal and read, and for a moment something like surprise lifted his smooth brows, and in that instant the room learned that even the spider did not always know where the web was broken. "A letter," Varys murmured, "from Lord Stannis Baratheon, written from Dragonstone and sent at the news of King Robert's passing." He gave the parchment a little wave. It made a small sound like a bird's frightened wing. "He bids the city watch to hold to law and to him as lawful heir until his arrival. He appends a copy of—" His voice almost smiled. "A will." There was a second piece of parchment, bearing Robert's hand and seal. Ned did not look at Cersei's face. He did not look at Littlefinger's either. He looked at Janos Slint. The gold cloak swallowed, and some calculation ran through him like a whisper. Behind him, the men of the watch shifted. Men who were paid to hold to the wind now held their breath instead. "You will remove your hand from the arm of that throne, your grace," Ser Barristan said, and though his words were not shouted, the iron of them struck the far walls. Cersei's hand did not move. At some sign no one saw, 24 gold cloaks stepped forward to close on Ned. Ser Barristan took one step and every man in the room felt the old air of tournaments and battlefields breathe upon them. Janos Slint hesitated, and in the heartbeat of his hesitation something else occurred. Something rare. The men behind him did not all take that step with him. Some had wives with northern brothers. Some had served under Barristan Selmy when they were boys. Some had carried a message for Eddard Stark and found their hand returned to them with a thank you and their pay in full. Their feet knew those things before their minds framed them. "Hold," Slint barked, and it was not the cry he had intended. He looked at Cersei. She gave him nothing. His eyes flicked to Littlefinger and found only an amused disinterest there, like a cat watching two dogs weigh each other. He thought of the letter read into the room, and of the ship that had brought it. He thought of a stag's head stamped into wax and how that might look to a man who imagined himself at the head of the city watch a year hence. "Hold," he said again, more sure. The gold cloak's forward movement stopped, leaving them awkwardly too close to the hand to pretend they had never planned to seize him. Slint turned his palm out. "Your Grace," he said to Cersei. "The law." Cersei smiled. It was not the smile of a woman amused. It was the careful arranging of muscles she had taught herself before a mirror long ago. "The law is what the king says it is," she said. "The law is what the king's will says it is," Ser Barristan answered. "And the law names Stannis." The queen looked at him as she might have looked at a talking dog. "Seize him," she said, and the men behind her, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt, sword-heavy and not nearly the knights their cloaks pretended, moved. Barristan drawn steel, and a sigh went through the room. Ned took one step back to stand clear. His heart beat steadier than it had any right to do. Littlefinger watched Cersei, and as she stepped, he did not move to place himself between her and danger. He put his hands behind his back and watched something delicate begin to break. It did not come to blood. Renly, late and breathless, came in at a half-run, Loras Tyrell at his shoulder, and their entrance knocked the moment askew. Loras had the arrogance of a young man who had never fallen when he should have, and he was moving when he should have listened. He had his hand on his sword when he saw Davos's letter in Varys's hand, though he could not have known what it was. "My lord," Loras called to Renly, "we should go." Cersei turned, her face finding new light. "Yes, Lord Renly, go. Go and find longer swords. This is not finished." "It is, your grace," Ned said. "It is finished by law." He felt the ache of a wound that had not yet been made and yet was already healing. "The king's custody is the king's guards. My daughters will return with me to the Tower of the Hand. The queen will be confined to her apartments until the rightful king comes to sit that chair." Cersei did not scream. She did not weep or scratch or claw. She looked at him as if he were a man she had once considered sleeping with and had then considered killing and had decided in the end to ruin instead. "You will regret this," she said, so calmly that the words twisted more deeply for it. "Perhaps." Ned lifted his head to the watchmen and to the knights on either side. "Do your duty." They did. Not all. Enough. She went with 2 white cloaks before and 2 behind, her chin high, Sansa a ghost in their wake. Littlefinger stayed behind as if by chance. He met Ned's eye and shrugged, a small concession to the lie that he had ever been on anyone's side but his own. "You misjudge me, Lord Stark," he said in a voice not meant to carry. "No," Ned said. "I do not." When they were gone, the throne room exhaled. Varys smiled like a man in a play who had remembered his lines at last. Janos Slynt looked at the floor and thought of Newsome's. Yoren found Arya in the confusion that followed. Dogs running, silks tearing, servants like ants on fire. He held a hand as black and rough as a horse's knee out of a shadow and said the quietest thing he ever said in his life. "Come." Syrio Farrell stood in a doorway like a woodsman at the edge of his forest and kept 4 men, then 5, then 6 from coming through it. He moved without fear and with a joy that made the men who fought him furious because they could not find it in themselves. The last thing Arya heard before the noise swallowed her was wood breaking in a sound that was also bone and the word girl in a voice that had taught her the balance of stepping stones across a stream. When Davos reached Dragonstone, a storm had found the island and was hitting it with rain and wind and the sound storms make when they remember that men are only small shadows on their long way. He climbed the wet steps with the king's writ beneath his jerkin and thought halfway up, "I am an old fool for running and will be an old fool when I stop." He delivered the parchment in Stannis' chamber with the boy Devon asleep in a chair and Maester Cresson leaning on a staff too light for more than show. Stannis read and did not change expression at all. "It is done then," he said at last. "It is barely begun, my lord," Davos answered. Stannis' hand flattened upon the parchment as though he could pin the realm in place with his palm. "Send the ravens," he said to Cresson, his voice like stone. "Write to the lords of the Stormlands. Write to Selmy. Tell them I come to take what is mine. Tell them they may meet me in King's Landing and save themselves the trouble of explaining to their sons why they preferred a queen's smile to a king's law." "And the queen?" Cresson asked. "The children." Stannis' jaw jumped. "The queen broke the kingdom when she first opened her legs to her brother. The children." He shut his eyes for one heartbeat. "The children are not to blame for being born. We will not take their heads. The law has enough blood to carry without adding theirs." The chill that came with that decision did not change his voice. "They will be kept in custody until their usefulness to treason is gone." "Men will praise you for that," Davos said quietly. "I do not want praise," Stannis said. "I want the law." He came by sea, under a day of white clouds that ran like sheep and a night that smelt of old metal and salt, with the royal fleet that had held the Blackwater now turning its oars and sails to its rightful master. Some captains had to be reminded of their duty. Some had to be replaced. Some had to be promised that whether or not they loved Stannis Baratheon would love them less if they did not obey him. when his ships showed their kraken-cutter prows at the mouth of the Blackwater. A murmur went through the city like a breeze finding 1,000 chimes. Ned stood with Ser Barristan upon the walls and watched the sails appear in 2s and 3s, and then in a sweep like a harvest. The river smelled of mud and tar and whatever had died in it last year. He had not slept. He had slept a little. He could not remember. Sansa slept under guard in the Tower of the Hand. Arya was... He refused the thought and let it cut across him, and let the wound bleed and kept standing. Stannis walked into the red, keep the way winter comes to the north. Not quickly, and not slowly, but with the inevitability of a season. He wore black as he always had. He wore no jewels. He wore a face as hard as a mailed fist. He made no speech when he sat the Iron Throne for the first time. He put his hand upon the hilt of a sword and did not cut himself, though the throne took blood almost as a matter of habit. Men said later that he had not been the first to sit so without blood. Men said a great many things later. In that first hour he named Eddard Stark as Hand. He named Ser Barristan Selmy Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, as he had been and had always been meant to be while king sat who knew the shape of honor. He ordered the queen and her children confined to the Maiden Vault. He commanded that no man cut a child's head for any reason without his word. He sent letters to the lords of the realm with the king's hand and seal upon them, and Davos watched those letters go and thought of birds, and of how some came home and some lost their way out over the bright water and were never seen again. Renly was gone by then. The green cloak had fluttered from a balcony in the night like a leaf losing its patience with a tree. He went for Highgarden, and if he looked back no one saw it. The realm did not hold still for Stannis Baratheon any more than a river will stop its run for a man who wades into it with an iron band around his head. At Casterly Rock, Lord Tywin read a courier's letter and did not change his face for a long while, and then said, "Jaime." And a flurry of ravens went west like crows rising. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn held her boy close in a little bed made for far bigger sleeping and smiled, because this meant the rest of the world was farther away, not closer. In the Riverlands, Gregor Clegane set fire to a herrick and watched it take and laughed, and the laugh made birds rise up in a black exhalation, and it made one small boy beside the river tighten his jaw and think, "I will kill the mountain." At Winterfell, Robb Stark stood with a letter in his hand and the window open and the smell of rain across the yard. He read his father's words twice, then a third time, then smoothed the parchment with both hands and read a fourth. "Hold," his father said. "Hold. See to the harvest. See your mother safe if she comes. Do not let anger be your guide where duty must be." In the next week, messengers reached Winterfell with the news that Gregor had been across the Tumblestone and the gods knew where else, and that men were dead with no answer given for their death but the flash of steel, and that Edmure Tully could not hold the river lines with all the levies he could pull in a day. Maester Luwin asked Robb what he meant to do very gently, as one asks a young man how he plans to lift a weight too heavy for him. Robb felt his blood, hot and newly insistent, and said what he would do in a voice steadier than he felt. He would call the banners. He would march for the Riverlands because the Riverlands were his mother's kin and no one burned Tully Fields while a wolf slept. He did not ride because his father was taken. He rode because men who had given him bread were having their bread stolen at sword point. It was a difference that would not matter at all to the men he killed. Catelyn heard two kinds of news at the Eyrie: that her husband had taken the city with law, and that the Riverlands burned because of men who thought law a small thing. She sat under the pale sky of the Vale and listened while Lisa's mouth formed reasons for why she would do nothing and thought of the long green of Riverrun and the clocking of the river under the ramparts in spring. Tyrion Lannister argued himself into a corner and argued himself back out of it and then argued himself out of the Vale itself on the narrow plank of a mercenary's sword, and when Bronn asked for gold, Tyrion paid him because he knew the worth of a plank once he had crossed it. He rode west to find his father and discovered he had never lost the habit of finding men who were stronger than him and tricking them into thinking he was worth their time. In King's Landing, the air changed somehow. It did not become sweet. It did not become honest. But some of the rats grew quieter. Stannis allowed no rapes in the street. He allowed no men of means to buy their way out of their vows. He allowed no baker to sell loaves that weighed less than they ought. If he had been made curious by Sansa Stark's beauty, he gave no sign. He ignored songs. He counted barrels. He demanded accounts and received them, and when accounts did not balance, men learned that kind of arithmetic netted a very dear sum. Varys slid around him like a shadow around a corner and came away with fewer secrets than he had hoped. Littlefinger smiled, and Stannis kept him anyway for a time because some knives are useful even when you cannot forget they are knives. Ned could breathe, not easily. There was too much to be done, and a world does not tidy itself because a man in black sits a chair of knives. But he could breathe without remembering he was breathing. He sent for Sansa, and when she stood before him in the Tower of the Hand, she was as pale as the morning after snowfall. He took her hands and felt how they trembled and made himself remember that she was a child, and then made himself remember that children cannot be treated as if they are made of the same glass as their hopes. He told her Arya was safe, and for that he was a liar. He told her that no one would hurt her again, and for that he hoped he was not. Night after night, men brought him lists. Grain taken in and grain promised, spears counted and spears broken, ships to be repaired, ships to be built, men owed coin, men who owed coin. In the small hours, when candles spat and the city outside made the low, ceaseless sound of a creature asleep and dreaming of its own hunger, Ned would push the figures away and take out another kind of paper, the letters to Robb to hold when holding grew hard, the letters to Catelyn to say that he was well enough and that he remembered the pattern of light on the water at Riverrun in the late afternoon, and that he loved her as he had loved her when they were young and poor in everything but expectation. He walked once with Stannis in the low light of the empty throne room, their steps dragging across rushes that would need changing in the morning. "I did not think you would be the man to send for me," Stannis said, as if the words had weights and he could judge Ned's strength by how he carried them. "I did not send for you because I loved you," Ned said, and that earned him the smallest flicker of something in Stannis's eyes. "I sent for you because law demanded it. You are not a man to call on law light." "Ly," Stannis said. "I am not," Ned agreed, "but I am a man who knows it when his hands meet it, and this is what we have. There is the sword and there is this. If the sword is not to rule every time, the law must sometimes be chosen when it feels like the duller blade." Stannis looked up at the throne without longing. "The duller blade can be the harder to lift. Then we will lift it together," Ned said. "The lords will not love you. They will not love me. We must make do with what they will obey." "They will not obey if Tywin wins," Stannis said. "He is the kind of man men prefer to follow because he tells them what they already wish to do." "Then we must present them with a different wish," Ned said, and thought of the Riverlands, and thought of Robb, and thought of boys with swords screaming their first screams. War did not ask their leave. It arranged itself according to the habits of land and hunger. Tywin sat at Harrenhal, black smoke standing above him like some obscene tree. He sent Jaime south by the Golden Tooth and then east to the fords, and it made him almost happy, if Tywin could be said to be happy, that men called his son Swift again. Robb came down from the north with winter wolves at his heels and a girl's wolf gone feral somewhere in the deep woods behind him, and the story grew in the telling that no man who faced the young wolf could hold his bow steady, which was not true, but is the kind of lie that wins small wars inside the larger one. Ned did not see his son cross the neck. He did not see him come to the twins and bargain with a stone-faced old weasel of a lord whose bridges were worth more than all the swords in the small folks' hands. He did not see the Whispering Wood, where men said the trees themselves could not help but hold their breath to hear their own leaves stirring. Nor did he see Jaime Lannister throw himself into a knot of men the way a man throws a stone into a dark pond to see what comes up. He did not see the way Robb slipped around the older man's strength and made a boy's trick look like an old man's strategy, and put the Kingslayer down in the mud stunned as a struck hawk. He saw only the end of it written in the harder pen of fact. Jaime delivered to King's Landing under guard that looked less like honor and more like the farmer's practical binding of a strong hog. Catelyn's eyes when she looked at the boy she had forgiven her anger in before he had the sense to earn it and now forgave herself for having ever thought him less than he was. Stannis wanted Jaime's head. He did not shout it. Shouting is for men who need words to stand there and do their cutting. Stannis said it in a tone of account, "Here is what is owed," and the way he said it made it seem somehow like the weather. He slew the king he swore to guard, Stannis said, and in his voice was something like hunger and something like contempt and something that was only Stannis. He put a sword in Aerys Targaryen's back. He is called Kingslayer as if it were a jape. The law calls it murder. Then the law will have to wait its turn, Ned said. Stannis turned his head very slightly. You would set the law aside for your wife's family. I will set your law alongside mercy, Ned said, and held Stannis' stare until the king looked away, because looking away from a man like Eddard Stark could sometimes be the brave thing to do. We have no right to cut off a man's head because it satisfies some neatness in us when we can trade him for men who will otherwise die nameless on a riverbank. You mean Sansa, Stannis said. I mean men, Ned said. But yes, Sansa too. We do not have Joffrey to trade for, Stannis said. We have the all but names of his blood in custody, and I will not release a single one of them like a bad smell into the corridors of this castle while I sit the chair they tried to steal. Then we keep them, Ned said, and we trade Jaime for space to breathe. If I release him to your headsman, you will be king of a smaller place whose walls are closer than you think. Davos found Ned that night in the Tower of the Hand and cleared his throat in a way that men had learned meant he was about to say something that he felt did not require being said. My lord, he said, you know what he is. I do, Ned said. He is the right king, Davos said simply. He will be a hard king, hard for himself, hardest for himself, but he will keep a line that is straight. Ned lifted the quill and thought about lines. A line can be straight and drawn across a child's throat, he said softly. I will not let him do that. He looked at Davos. And I will not let him make a law that leaves no room for the thing that makes us better than stones. Davos rubbed his thumb over the place where two joints did not come together as they should have. He said, but if you're always putting soft between hard, the world will push where it can. Then we will push back, Ned said. He was tired past his bones. But there was something in him still that had not broken in the fall of the blade that had taken his father's head. We will do it tomorrow and the day after. He wrote letters to Tywin that night that had no poetry in them at all, and another to Robb that did. Just a line about the first snow on the Lichyard at Winterfell that he had once found stupid with wonder as a boy, and he sealed them with wax he pressed too hard. When morning came, it came with a messenger at speed from Storm's End, and the kind of news the world makes when it decides laughter is crueler than death. Renly Baratheon had raised his banners. The Tyrells stood with him. He had had a crown made for himself, antlers too small but new enough to shine brighter than old iron, and men loved him. Men loved him because he was not Stannis. Men loved him because he gave them leave to love themselves. The Redwine fleet rode out from the arbor with sails like clipped fingernails and crews that loved wine and loved to sing and were good at both. Pax to Redwine set his jaw and decided he would block the Blackwater the way a cork blocks a bottle. Stannis sent Davos out to meet him, and the first battle of their war was fought not on mud under banners but on green water under sun. The Black Betha cut like a memory of hunger cured too late, swift and cunning. There were no wildfire tricks yet, no chains stretched like grudges across a river mouth. There was only wood against wood, and the way oars bite the water like teeth when a man rows for his life, and sail against sail, and the scream a man makes when he realizes the sea will take him whether or not he has ever learned to swim. Davos did not love battle for its own sake. He loved bringing a ship through a thing that wanted to break it. He brought 3 through. He lost 2. Paxter Redwine counted losses like a banker and decided to run tighter. Davos counted the same and decided to cut deeper. Men died neither knowing nor caring whether Stannis or Renly made the better king. Some had never seen a king. When word of the naval stalemate reached King's Landing, Stannis did not rage. He did not throw his goblet. He did not stop to wonder whether the gods of Salador San were stronger than the gods of the priests who had burned candles in Dragonstone for 1,000 years and burned men in the shadow of the fiery heart more recently. He stood with both hands on the arms of the Iron Throne and said, "Right?" And Davos watched Ned Stark write and thought that if men ever told this as a story, they would make it grander than it was and forget entirely how much sitting and reading and sending letters of war is made of. Cersei read in the Maiden Vault. She read stories of brave princesses who were saved by men in shining armor and found herself half sick with the old longing to be one of them, and half sick with contempt. She spoke quietly with her brother through the little grate when he came to see her after he had been captured and brought to King's Landing, and she did not cry when he was led away again. She told Sansa things about the world that were true and things that were not. Sansa learned to listen and learned to not believe. She learned to read. She learned to not fall asleep crying every night, but only half of them. Arya went north under a name that did not fit her skin at all, and learned to bite it like an inside mouth and make no face. Yoren taught her to sleep anywhere, and to comb her hair into knots that told men with wrong eyes that she was not worth bothering. She dreamed of wolves. In the dream, she moved with a weightless certainty through snow she had never seen. She woke hot and angry and always hungry. In the Riverlands, Robb marched and was greeted like an answer and like a question. He made mistakes small enough not to break him and learned from them, and he did not make the very large mistake he had almost been born to make because he had not yet met Jane Westerling. He wrote to his father, and when the ravens came back they found him thinner and harder around the eyes and more careful about what he said to men who wanted to drink near him when their turn at watch was over. Ned and Stannis argued quietly about 1,000 things. The number of barrels of grain needed to carry the city through the winter if winter came hard. The number of men to commit to the Mander if packs to Redwyne came upriver in the wet months. The matter of the faith's taxes and whether the faith should be taxed at all. The matter of cutting a man's head for stealing a loaf when the loaf was for his son, and whether leniency such as that taught by men like Eddard Stark turned into license when men smelled weakness, as Stannis said it did. They spoke sometimes, when the bottles had been counted and the candles burned low, about children. Stannis's awkward, plain daughter with her bad skin who had once given a half onion to a cat because a sailor had told her cats loved onions. Ned's girls, one in a tower and one on a road. About sons who live and sons who die. "You do not smile," Ned said once, in a voice that held no accusation but only a kind of wonder. "You do not stop." "There is no time to stop," Stannis said. "There is no reason to smile." "There is always a reason," Ned said. He did not go on. "Some reasons cannot be given like bread." When news came of Renly's banners turning east from Bitterbridge with field kitchens and perfumed tents and singers enough to drown the sound of 1,000 men pissing at night, Stannis did not panic. He cut from the walls all the soft banners that had appeared like weeds since he arrived. He doubled the watch on the gates. He told men to sharpen their pikes and put out the word that if a man looted he would lose his right hand and then be hung. He fed the people. They did not love him. They obeyed. Renly's host came as a moving fair, bright and restless, and the sight of it on the horizon made even men who hated the Tyrells stop and look. He came within sight of the city and set his green tents and sent envoys with mouths full of honey and hands that had never had to hold much more than a cup. Stannis received them like a man receiving the rent from tenants who thought themselves clever for having kept a little more for winter. Mace Tyrell arrived in his belling green cloak like a frog who had learned to strut. Loras came with him and did not bow and then did, when Ser Barristan's face did not change. Renly came last, in a crown that was too small for him, and for a moment Ned saw something like Robert in him and hated that the resemblance could strangle. "Brother," Renly said. "Lord Renly," Stannis said, inflicting the title upon the younger man like a fine, invisible pain. They met in the great hall because winter burned the gardens to nothing worth offering, and because Stannis would not meet in a tent. The air between the two of them had a fragrance like a struck flint. Renly made the gestures and the speeches. Stannis made none. He set the law on the table like a board for a game Renly had never learned to play. "Men follow me," Renly said finally. He spread his hands, and if he had leaned back in a chair, he would have looked at ease. "They love me. They follow you because you are not me," Stannis said. "That is not the same thing." "It has the same result," Renly said and flashed his teeth. "Except for the throne," Stannis said. "You are pretty and you make them laugh. That is not law. You always did prefer a frown to a song." Renly's gaze slid to Ned. "Lord Stark, do you mean to hand my brother my head and tell me it is for the best?" "I mean to hand the realm what is its own," Ned said. "If you love it, You will not split it for pride's sake." Renly's smile held for a heartbeat longer. Then it left his face like a gull leaving the prow of a ship. "I do not love it as much as I love living," he said, and that was that. He came in the dawn 2 days later, blowing horns and banners shaking, and for a few hours King's Landing thought it was a city again, the way it had been when such things were just shows and not the throat closing of something large. There was no wildfire, no chain. There were men at the gates and men on ladders and the flower of Highgarden falling. For the first time, when he tried to take a wall by clean speed alone and learned that sometimes weight matters more. Stannis' archers shot like men who'd been told they would be shot if they wasted arrows. The gold cloaks did their duty because Janos Slint had counted correctly, and because the woman at his table who cooked his supper had been given a loaf that week and said his name when she put her children to bed. Ser Barristan stood on the steps of the Great September and cut a man in green cloaks from shoulder to hip because the man had cut the baker's boy for shouting for the wrong king. And when men saw the old white knight, they stopped thinking of age and started thinking of how hard he had always been. It did not become a slaughter. It did not become a victory. It became one of those inexplicable things war throws into the path of historians. Neither triumph nor catastrophe. Renly drew back to lick his pride and count. Stannis held the walls and hated the music the Tyrells had brought because it had not yet stopped. The letter that came from Robb following that day was short and to the point. He had cut Jaime Lannister from his horse and from his hope and would bring him to the city to trade for peace. Peace for Riverrun, recognition for the North's rights, the Riverlands soothed and soothed again, safe passage for his army's return. He did not threaten. He stated. Men who had been both threatened and stated at thought the second more dangerous. The council that followed went like this. Stannis wanted the Kingslayer's head. Ned wanted Sansa's life, and the lives of other women with hair gold or brown who had done nothing but wear it. Davos wanted men to stop dying. Littlefinger wanted a tally he could use. Varys wanted time. Ser Barristan wanted to do his duty and did not need to speak to say so. In the end, it came to the dull hard thing it always comes to. They would trade a man for a realm. Stannis did not sign the parchment that set Jaime Lannister under generous guard only to be let out under another. He scratched his name without flourish and then pressed his seal too deeply, and when he lifted it he was angry with himself for being angry. He left the room without a word. Davos followed with his silent, habitual loyalty. Littlefinger smiled to himself, which is as close as he came to prayer. Varys did not smile. He never smiled unless it was useful. Catelyn entered the Red Keep while the hills crept faintly with spring. She did not run. She walked as if she knew the floor was thin and held by a fractious whim. She went first to her daughter and held Sansa and saw in the girl not the sweetness she had prayed would survive, but something else, harder, more complicated, and she thought, "They will sing of you wrong because the songs know so little of girls." Then she went to her husband and did not say "I love you" and did not say "I feared," because there is a kind of love that has already made those words part of itself. She said only, "I am here," and he said, "So am I," which is different from saying "I am alive" and more important and more rare. When Robb came, he came younger than men had last seen him and older too. He came with Mormont men at his back and Glover men and Karstarks with eyes like winter stones. And he came with a wolf as big as a small horse with a patience in him that had grown since leaving his litter and losing his sister and learning the smell of many kinds of men. Jaime rode through the city with a small smile on his face, because some men are made lighter by danger. People threw things and then stopped when they realized the boy in front with the wolf might not appreciate the gesture any more than the queen had. Sansa watched from a window because her father told her to stay in and because she learned to obey in ways that would not break her. Arya was somewhere on the King's Road stepping in dog dung and making faces at the man who told her not to worry because dog dung brings luck. The exchange went like this. Jaime Lannister for the Queen's Lady and her children's lives, and an armistice on the Trident that would hold long enough for bread to rise twice in ovens that had gone cold. It was not much. It was a great deal. Tywin took his son back and counted him and called him foolish and allowed himself the brief indulgence of feeling something that was not anger. He drew his forces back a little and called it strategy and sent more coins to more men he thought would return them with interest in the form of oaths. He did not stop. He did not forgive. He did not forget. But he counted. Renly did not give up. He showed his banners at dawn and at dusk and asked the realm to look at him and see the easier answer. He laughed and kissed and wore green, and when men left his tent they felt younger, and that made them love him. But fewer left than before. The first clash had taught something that you cannot learn from songs. The man in black on the iron chair could hold a wall, and he would not stop feeding his people in the dark. And if you chose a king because he made you happy, you must be ready to be hungry. It did not become peace. The realm never falls into anything the way a drunk falls into sleep. It dragged. It got better in small places. It rotted in others. In King's Landing, a baker put out loaves each morning, and a man counted them with the hand's mark on his arm. In the Vale, Lisa taught her son to be afraid of everything. In the north, Maester Luwin let Bran touch the carved face of a heart tree, and did not say that sometimes there are things beyond a maester's ink. In Dragonstone, Celis knelt before a flame with a woman with red hair behind her and whispered words that made the air strange, and no one, not even the woman with the red hair, smiled at them. Winter gathered itself at the far edges of the map. Ned thought of it when he walked the Red Keep's Sorry Godswood, where the heart tree held no true face. He thought of it when he walked the walls at night and the wind off the narrow sea found the seams in his cloak and lifted them like old scars. He thought of it as he wrote a letter to Jon Snow at the wall and told him nothing and told him everything and told him that he loved him, though he did not write those words and never would. Once, standing by the window of the Tower of the Hand, Ned looked out over a city he never wanted and saw it as it was. A creature made of mouths and ashen eyes that watched and hands that weighed. Down in the yard, Ser Barristan was Instru, Ting a squire in the cut that turns a man aside without killing him. On the river, a ship went out with the tide. The bells sounded tierce and then sexed, and somewhere in the narrow ways a woman cried out because her child's first tooth had come in, or because her husband had left her for a girl who still had baby fat on her stomach and did not yet know the shape of a man's cruelty. Stannis came up beside him, not because he wanted to share a view, but because he needed to say a thing that might be softened by the presence of a window. "I will not have this city starved," he said. "Tyrell will starve us if he can. I will not let him. If I must take the arbor, I will. If I must hang men who hoard grain, I will." "You will do what you must," Ned said, "and I will do what I must. And between us we will set the law so its teeth bite the right throats." Stannis made a sound that might have been a laugh on another man. "There are no right throats," he said. "There is only the throat that stands in the way and the hand that holds the sword. But yes," he paused, "I did not think we would stand like this, you and I." "Nor I," Ned said. "If we had done this sooner," Stannis said very quietly, and that quiet held more grief than he would ever allow aloud, "Robert would still be alive." Ned thought of a laughing boy with a warhammer. He thought of the man that boy had become under a mountain of ale and expectation. He thought of a boar and a grin and a crown too heavy. "Perhaps," he said. He did not say that Robert had been as much a part of his own death as any boar. He did not say it because no one needs the truth of blame when they already know it. Night came. Day came. A raven lit on the Tower of the Hand with a message about wildlings folk beyond the wall gathering in a way that had made the old men at Castle Black go very still. Ned read it and folded it and wrote to the king, and the king read it and nodded and said, "Send them more men." And Ned said, "We have none to spare." And Stannis said, "Send them anyway." And they did. And that small thing would matter a great deal to men whose names no one in King's Landing had ever spoken. It would not be sung, but a man in black on a wall of ice would one day remember the weight of it. In the Godswood of the Red Keep, such as it was, the heart tree did not have eyes to bleed. Ned went there anyway, because no man is ever so southern in his bones that he can forget the feel of bark underhand if the bark has once carried his prayer. He knelt and the city thumped around him as if a giant's pulse beat beneath his knees. He spoke to no one or to gods or to a memory of his father. He spoke to winter. He said, "We have held one line." He said, "We will try to hold another when it falls apart." He said, "I will bring my daughters home." He said, "The world is not what a man hopes it to be." He said, "I will still hope it." He said, "I will not be ashamed." When he rose, there was a boy watching him from the doorway, a boy employed by nobody in particular and by the city in general. The boy stared a moment, because the hand looked like a grief he might one day be able to name. Then he ran, because boys run to carry news the way they run to carry ropes, and the city breathed and went on being itself, which is the cruelest and kindest way a city can be. And still ravens flew, and still the sea ate boats and returned them, and still the law bent its dull blade and kept striking. Men loved and hated the king who did not smile and the hand who did not bow, and the boy with the wolf who left his prisoner behind with a spring in his step and rode back into mud because it was what the North does. No songs were right. All of them helped. The bells of the September rang. A woman stood at her window and hoped that the man she had chosen would not die of his choice. A man looked at the blade in his hand and wished for a plowshare. Far to the north, a white empty place considered the petty courts of men and was unswayed. Eddard Stark came back to his table and to his ink. He drew the next letter toward him and put his hand to it. Outside, on the river, the tide turned. Inside, on the table, the map stayed as it was and as it would not be for long. He wrote because that was the only thing that stood between a boy's golden head and a law that would either straighten or break, and because sometimes a letter is a better weapon than the sword that goes with it. He wrote until the candle burned out. He wrote because winter is not something you stop by closing a door. Winter is something you meet with logs and blankets and stubbornness enough to make a shape of hope under. In the morning, he rose. He washed his face in water that had gone cold while he sat too long. He looked in the glass and thought, I am not the man I was when the snows came early on the bar Rollins. He stood in the window where the light made dust motes holy. He put his cloak on and his hand upon the hilt of a sword that had seen too much law and too little battle and had still held. He went out. The city was waiting, as it always was, breathless with the need to be fed and warm and told what it was. Somewhere, the sea flashed and forgot him. Somewhere, a girl in boy's clothes counted her coins and picked her teeth with a splinter and did not cry today. Somewhere, a wife fetched water and did not think of kings at all. He went on, and beside him went men he had come to respect without liking and men he had come to like without trusting, and men he would die beside if duty asked it of him. He went on, because it was all any man could do while the letters flew and the law held and the war arranged itself around the stubborn fact that this time, the truth had been sent not to a grave but to a man who would not shirk the weight of it. He went on, and winter, seeing that, paused a moment longer at the edge of maps it had already decided to cross.